What's up, gentlemen? This is Rising Phoenix Podcast, a podcast about how to rise up after your divorce. I'm your host, divorce coach, Michael Rhodes. Let's get into it.
Joining me today is Mr. Donald Altman. Donald, let's just jump right into it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, thank you, Michael. Before I start with that, I just wanted to thank you for the work you're doing. And I know you've done over 100 podcasts. That's quite an accomplishment, and you're helping a lot of people. And so that's, I think,
Thank you.
something you can be proud of. Yeah, I've really known more as a mindfulness writer than anything else, perhaps. I've written 20 books, many about mindfulness, self-help, spirituality. I've written a new book, which is a novel. You see that behind me, Your Travelers. And that's a story really about somebody a psychiatrist who was forced to confront his rational mind and to go beyond that and to seek new ways of healing. And it's kind of a mystical journey. And it shows how everybody has some kind of demon they have to conquer, have to face, right? And it can be external, it can be internal. And but we have to, we have to face those if we're going to grow in our lives, if we're going to find health, wholeness, and healing. Wow. And I think that's really ties very well into what you're doing. I myself was divorced some years ago, and it was one of the most painful experiences I had. And I've learned a lot from going through that, I think. And we all have emotional knots. It's one of the things I think we wanted to talk about today. And I have a blog on the Psychology Today website. It's the Mindful Practices blog. You can even subscribe to that if you want. That's a nice way to get some tools. I'm very much into getting the tools, and I hope we get to share today one of those tools that I put up on that website. But I also had ordained for a period of time when I went through a very difficult period of my life, and often you find these problems repeating, whether they're relational or other problems are repeating. And finally, I had gone to therapy when I was much younger, but finally I got to a point where I was like, wait, who brought this can of worms? Why does this keep following me? Right? And I had the good fortune to ordain in a Theravada Buddhist monastery with a well-known Burmese Buddhist monk by the name of Uthilananda, who came to the U.S. in the late 70s. And in the midst of when I was struggling with this repetitive destructive pattern, a friend said, "There's a monk I'd like you to meet," and I met him. And that's kind of a cautionary tale. I don't think we have to go into the monastery to solve these problems, right? But hopefully I went in, and because when I met him, he had this incredible, it was a palpable sense of compassion and availability. I had never really sensed anything like that in anybody before. And believe me, I came from Chicago. I came from a rough neighborhood, and you never find those kind of people hanging around where I grew up. So, but I wanted to know, I was curious, how did he become the person he is, right? And it takes a kind of training, actually, is what I learned. When I went to the monastery, I think one of the people have said, well, what is the one thing you really learned? What I learned was, I am not my thoughts. That was probably one of the big things I learned, because I had a lot of thoughts and belief systems that were really kind of dragging me down or causing me to repeat some of the old patterns. And so I learned that I'm not necessarily my thoughts. And one of the practices I hope we share today, this 4 steps for untying emotional knots, helps us gain some insight into that in our own lives, kind of separating from thoughts, creating some distance from them, and just seeing that we have all kinds of thoughts. We can have angry thoughts, you can have destructive thoughts, you can have distressing, random, crazy thoughts, but you don't need to grab onto those thoughts, right? But if you do grab on and you ruminate on a thought or an anxiety or a fear, it pulls you, right? So this is about taking, letting go in a way, taking a little bit less of a lighter touch when it comes to watching our thoughts. In fact, I might even ask your listeners today, have you counted the number of thoughts you had today?
I don't think I can count that high.
Yeah, well, I don't think any of us can. I think researchers try to figure out we have about 20,000 thoughts a day. and yeah, isn't that crazy? And yet, how
Yeah.
many of those thoughts tell you something really profound about who you are as a person, right? How many
Yeah.
are useful thoughts? How many are just maybe conditioned thoughts,
Sure.
habitual thoughts, right? Or just random thoughts that come up. But we sometimes give them a lot of credibility, a lot of creed because they
Sure.
come from in our own head.
Uh-huh.
But we don't need to do that, is the point. But
Yeah, it's one of the more difficult things, but also I think one of the more beneficial things is to be able to, as you say, and John Kim says this as well, about having distance, and then realizing even your actions sometimes you have to have distance from, because they can't you can't allow them to define you, because it can get you trapped into this belief system that, if your thoughts are bad, you're bad, or if your actions on
mm,
occasion are bad, that you're bad. But I agree, you need to have some distance from these things, but it's really hard to do. But
it is
that's sort of the core of what we're going to talk about here, right? It's
Yeah,
being
yeah.
able to
It
have
is very
distance.
hard to do. And I saw my time in the monastery, and I wasn't in there a real long time, but I was very ripe for the experience. And I think if somebody's listening to this show, then they're ripe for
Yes.
growing, for finding some new strategies, right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
that work for them.
Yeah.
And um, so when I left the monastery, it changed my whole life really. And I think that
I bet.
you never know what one little thing you're going to hear is going to veer you off in a new direction.
Sure.
And I listened to one of your interviews you had with Robert Enright, the forgiveness guy,
Oh yeah, I love him.
and
Yeah.
yeah, that was really good.
Oh, thank you.
Uh, really got a lot out of that. But and I liked what he said. You do when you're ready for it.
Yeah.
Right. It's the same with any of these things that even what we're going to talk about today, you have to be ready. There's two ways you can go with something. Here's something bad happened to you, got divorced. They can go into a place of willfulness where I'm just going to I'm going to be righteous about it. I want my
Right.
way and try to force that. And that's willfulness. The other pathway is willingness, which is kind of an openness and a kind of like, let's see what's happening here. Maybe there's a silver lining to this. I
Yeah.
talk a lot about gratitude in my books and in my work. And gratitude comes from a very ancient word called gratitudo, which means find something pleasing at mealtime, actually. So it comes from the original grace at mealtime. But
Huh.
finding something pleasing, I think, is really important for people who have been hurt or felt abused or harmed, because that kind of it's kind of like a veil. It's kind of like putting on sunglasses. You see everything now through those sunglasses, right?
Yeah.
And gratitude helps you kind of take off the sunglasses and say, you know what? Yeah, there's some bad things here, but there's some good things too,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And so we need to see the good things, and so gratitude is a wonderful way of saying that. And there's different kinds of gratitude. One that I think maybe is worth mentioning on your show is what I call paradoxical gratitude. It's
Huh.
having gratitude for the things you wish you didn't have in your life,
Huh.
right?
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think of it as silver lining gratitude. So I was doing a workshop one time, and when I mentioned this paradoxical gratitude, woman, her hand shot up, and I said, "Well, she probably has a story to tell us. What's your story about that?" And she said, I lost my home in a tornado, and it was flattened. So fortunately, nobody was hurt.
Uh,
But she said, I always lived with the assumption and the belief that you had to be totally independent, had to get yourself through everything. You had to do things, be self-sufficient. You did everything by yourself. You couldn't count on other people. And when her home got flattened, the whole community came to her aid. There were people she didn't realize, and it opened her heart up. It made her feel more tender about, hey, you know what? I don't have to do things all on my own. There is a community out there for me, people willing to help me. And she said it changed my worldview in a profound way.
yeah.
And I think also what you're doing is you're giving people a community. And I think it's so important for us to know that you're not alone when you're going through a difficult condition, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So
That's one of the challenges, I think, because you say, about your thoughts are so immediate, they're right here, and
yeah,
it's hard to get outside input in a way that is the same as your thoughts, right? Like I can tell you that it's going to be okay, but your thoughts are telling you, I'm fucked. It's all over. Where there's no coming back from this, and so it's important that if you at least get around those people that can understand and sympathize and empathize and relate, because a lot of people try. I've noticed. It's been 3.5 years for me, but I noticed in the beginning, a lot of what I got was, especially for men, in fact, only for men, I think, but just get over it. You got to move on. You got to, that's it. It's done. And those people don't help you. The people that, because they haven't gone through it, or they're so out of touch with their feelings and emotions that they never dealt with it. So they don't want you to deal with it because that means, oh my gosh, someone have to actually feel something. So I think it's really important to get around people that understand, that have been through it, because they can speak to you in a way that makes it more palpable, or it makes it easier to sort of get into here, because they're saying some of the things that you're feeling because they experienced it. So let's talk about emotional knots. So what is an emotional knot?
I think an emotional knot is anything. It could come from your background. It could from something that's happening right now, but something that has you stuck, that has you tied up, that has you unable to move forward. You're talking about after, when you're divorced, there's a loss. I mean, that is a huge loss, and you have to learn how to grieve that. And no one grieves that in the same way. And the amount of time it takes is different for everybody. There are some losses that could take a lifetime to get over, right? It's interesting in the mental health field. It's been kind of controversial. There is now a disorder called prolonged grief disorder, that if you don't recover from grief after a year, there's something wrong with you. I mean, I think that's kind of ludicrous.
Yeah, I agree.
Everybody's different. But at least insurance will pay for it. So maybe that's the that's the paradoxical gratitude right there. So
that's funny.
But it's so important to find people who you can talk to and share things with. And I think what's key about an emotional knots is to start thinking in terms of emotions and feelings. And I think that's one area that men really need a lot of help with. It's, if you right now, let me, if I were to say to your audience, I want you to name 8 different emotions. There's going to be a lot of men who have a problem doing that.
Oh, yeah. We might get 3, 4, maybe.
Yeah. I don't think I'm angry. 8. I'm pissed off. I'm hurt. I'm
frustrated.
Sad. Right. But there's so many different things. If something unwanted happens, maybe you're frustrated, disappointed, exasperated, annoyed, irritated, flabbergasted. I mean, there's so many different things, or the same thing for positive emotions. So I think what's really important is for you to start being able to understand and name more emotions, and that will have a twofold effect. First of all, it's going to help you actually regulate your brain when you're able to name an emotion, and it's good to get into the body to do that. And that 4-part practice we're going to do actually gets you to do that. But if you're in the body more, you can notice your emotions more. You can give them a name.
Oh, yeah.
And research shows that if you can name your emotions, it's called name it and you tame it. If you can name the emotion, you're now making the emotion the object of your attention. You're looking at it differently. And you can say, wow, where do I feel that in my body? Where is it on a 1 to 10 scale? If it was a color, what color would it be? And suddenly you're not in the grip of it, right?
Yeah.
You're observing it. And that has been shown to actually quiet down a part of the brain. I give a little brain piece in here, the part of the brain that triggers the fight and flight, which is the amygdala. It's the stress part of the brain. And when you name that emotion, the amygdala quiets down.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it's actually, you're integrating the executive part of the brain that's naming the emotion with the amygdala. You're kind of helping them come together and integrate. So it's about whole brain integration. It's really fantastic to think, wow, we have the ability to do that, and that's very beneficial to us. So naming, expanding your emotional vocabulary, and maybe what you do is just sit down and write down all the emotions you can. You could look online and there's,
Yes.
emotional charts for that. When I was I was just ready to graduate from grad school and was an intern in the mental health field, which I did, by the way, after I got out of the monastery. I was older, but and our the person who was running our intern group, he'd ask us how we were doing, and we weren't expressing emotion very well. He said, you people are supposed to be in the mental health field, where
Uh,
you don't have a very limited
yeah.
availability of emotions. So he gave us an emotions of feelings chart, and it had little emojis of all the different
So,
emotions. But you can
yeah.
find those things online. They're really great, and start practicing expanding that. But so maybe
So
I could
let's
get.
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
let's talk about that. So let's get specific. So, an emotional not be anger over having to write a alimony child support
Abs.
check of some kind, right? You
Yeah.
get angry. I am pissed. But let's sort of go through that practice. If you are a man and you're having
Yeah.
that emotion and that feeling, and because of that particular thing, what's the process there? What would you recommend to that guy? What's he doing to
Okay.
start
What I
untying that
recommend
knot?
is the first thing we want to do is we want to regulate ourselves. And one of the best tools for regulating is using the breath. And now there might be some men out there who say, oh, using the breath, that's, you know, that
Right.
that sounds
Feminine,
kind of
gay,
wimpy.
right. So
Well,
you can say it, it's fine.
yeah. Well, what if I told you the Navy SEALs use it?
Oh,
And I interviewed a Navy SEAL who actually gave me a breathing technique that he used, but it's taught to all the Navy SEALs because they were a large percentage of them were failing their final exam test. And during the final exam at the Navy SEALs, you're attacked.
all
And they want to see how you use what you've learned to counterattack, right?
right.
But what happens is they would forget, because when you get aroused, you lose contact with your thinking brain. And they
Yes.
had such a high failure rate. They said, gee, what do we do? And they brought in these psychologists and they said, you got to teach your SEALs how to control that arousal state so they can still think clearly.
Yeah.
And so breathing was one of the huge things they taught them, along with positive self-talk, because they get very negative when they have to face so many of these challenges. So this is not a wimpy thing. So the SEAL I met actually shared with me how he would use breathing before he would go do these dangerous missions, right? So the first step of this is to pause. And I think it's good. You can stand when you do this and take some breaths. And notice where you're breathing. You want to notice if you're breathing into the lower part of the lungs, which will move your abdominal cavity out. It's called belly breathing, but it's diaphragmatic breathing. And why it works is that when you breathe into the deepest part of the lungs, it presses on the abdominal cavity. Think of the abdominal cavity like a balloon. If I press on a balloon, it expands out all the way around. And so when you take that deep breath, your abdominal cavity is squeezed down and it presses on the back of your spine. And it presses on what's called the vagus nerve. You don't need to remember all this, but what happens when it presses on the vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve, the longest cranial nerve, but it controls a lot of our emotional state. And when it's pressed on, it calms us down and lets us enter the relaxation response, which lowers blood pressure, lowers pulse rate, lowers respiration. It lets us think again, brings the prefrontal and the frontal cortex back into play. So you're back online with your thoughts, and yet you're in a calmer place. So that's why this breathing is so important. So I would take 2 or 3 of these nice, calming breaths, okay? And then what I would do is I would, tune in to the body. And what are you feeling in that moment? You got to write that check, right? I mean, so there might be more than one feeling, by the way, and that's actually probably the case. If you only have one, I think I want you to dig deeper and find more than one. Okay. And so name that emotion or emotions that you're feeling in that moment. And that's part of the emotional knot, right? So the third part of this is just recognition that this knot is temporary, right? And actually, because you're coming into the present moment, it can help in this moment to look around and find one thing that you like. Could be a favorite color,
Wow.
could be a sound. I had somebody do this one time and they said, I heard a bird chirping and that reminded me of springtime and it gave me hope. But it
Wow.
redirected their thoughts in that moment. So you find something that's pleasant, look around you in that moment, right?
Wow.
And then finally, the last part is just to, now you've come into the present moment. The last part is just exhale out. So take another nice breath. And wherever that tension or that tightness, that emotion is in the body, exhale it out. And you could even visualize it traveling down, down, out, down through the legs, down the feet, and back into the earth.
Wow.
Right? Just exhale it, let it go, release it, and feel the tightness in your body go. If there's any tightness in the body, just breathe into that tightness and exhale it out.
Wow.
Okay. So this is kind of a process of identifying, regulating the body. Okay. Um, Naming that emotion, tuning in, exhaling out any of the stress, right? Accepting, realizing this is temporary,
Wow.
right? As all things are, right? I mean, at some point you'll be laughing or smiling at something else, right? So you can let that go and then just release that knot. Also, I think it could be helpful to know that to think about what you could do in the next moment that could be positive for you.
Wow.
So taking it a step further, you might think, hey, who can I call in this moment that can maybe cheer me up? You know, who'd be a good laughing coach for me, or just, there's always somebody who puts a smile on our face. Have that person in mind, or do something for yourself, write something kind for yourself in that moment. But think about how you might prepare for the next thing in a positive way. So now you're kind of putting that behind you, and now you're doing something active and concrete, something real that can make you feel okay.
Yeah. But what are some of the things that, and I'm assuming the severity or intensity, maybe is a better word, of the emotions can derail this a little bit. But what are some of the other things that can just be so cause it to be extremely difficult to untie these knots, to deal with these negative emotions and
Yeah, I
situations?
think one of the things is how fresh do we keep it in our minds? We got to start to look at, how am I keeping this alive,
Right.
right? And of course, it's going to be harder if it's fresher for you, and you can just realize that, that this is really hard right now. You could even say that to yourself. I don't want to I can't let this go. I don't see a way to do this. But by practicing, I think that's the part here, that if you can
Yeah.
practice it, it becomes easier over time.
Right.
Right? You go to the gym, you get a trainer, you work out, you don't see any changes in the first week or two, maybe the first
Right.
month even, and then you start to see the changes. So I would, and it's funny because I've had people do this kind of practice who tended to get violent,
Right.
and when
Right.
they got aroused, one more, you know, flare up or getting in a fight with somebody, and they might go back to prison.
Yeah.
So I had people really practice this before using it in the real world,
Mhm.
you know. So
Yeah.
I want you to know that this only works if you apply it. It's like a
Yeah.
discipline, and that's really important. And just letting yourself know it will get easier over time. And what you could do even is you could create a little, book to journal or to rate it. How did it work for you? What was your emotional level before and after you did this? So you're actually keeping a record of it.
So I mean,
Okay.
this requires some real effort, right? This isn't just
Yeah.
yeah. It's not a quick
Requires,
fix. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
It's not
it's not a
something that
quick fix. It's not like,
yeah.
unfortunately, the good things aren't quick fixes.
Oh, it's
I,
very true.
yeah.
Yes.
And so um, but I think, the other thing is to share your expression of what you've experienced with someone else.
Mm.
I think that's a nice way to maybe get it off your chest. Not to have somebody feed into the anger, right? But somebody you can just share that with and then say, okay, I just needed to let that go. Somebody who could be empathetic. So empathy, just somebody who could be with the pain, with the suffering. It's a form of suffering that we go through. And no one's immune to suffering. That's the other point I think is good to know. I mean, I like to say, if you're in a human body and you have a human mind, then you will endure loss, you'll endure pains and insults of all different kinds. And what we can try to do is to minimize and not, the first loss is the loss of that relationship or that marriage or whatever, and all the dreams maybe that went with that. But then there's all the secondary losses of, creating, suffering for ourselves as a result of it. All the emotions that come with it. So we can, we're actually trying to not increase the suffering.
Yeah.
And so maybe there's a reminder, there's that initial thing is always going to be something that, I'm not going to be happy about.
Yeah.
But I don't have to drag it around like a ball and chain behind me all the time.
Yeah,
so I think that, I think the other thing here for men is, by learning that vocabulary, I think men, also when it comes to stress, men rate their stress lower than women do. We're kind of taught, just suck it up, work your way through it, that kind of thing. And I think it could be very helpful to us to say, hey, it's okay to have feelings. It's okay to ask for help. Yeah. It's not a weakness, it's a sign of maturity.
Yes.
And and the silver lining, I think, of any of these things is that we can grow from it, and we can make that next relationship, give it a better chance of working. And I went a few years after that breakdown of the marriage, and I found a wonderful partner.
Wow.
But I didn't try to rush it. That's the other thing. I said, let's look within too and see what's at the root of this and see how we can avoid, having that happen in the future.
Right. So when we're talking about anger, I always sort of wonder, we're talking about in the moment, sort of calming down, but then also sort of naming emotion, and how much of dealing with anger also requires you to get to the underlying. So if we're angry and then we name some of these emotions, don't we need to sort of explore those other emotions a little bit deeper and express them? So I always feel like anger, especially in men and especially in a modern society, anger is really more about hurt, either rejection or shame or humiliation or just plain disrespect or whatever, right? I feel like it's a hurt, and us men, we're lightning quick to cover that up with anger because that's what we've been conditioned to do. So how much do you need to, obviously you need to get calm in the moment, but how much do you need to explore the underlying emotions in order to untie these knots?
I think it can help to untie the knot is to go deeper. And because if you resist a knot, what happens? You pull it tighter, right? So you got to get in there and kind of work on the knot. You don't have to do it all at once. But if you say, okay, I'm angry, what's beneath the anger? And you say, oh, there's hurt. Then you could at some point say, okay, there's hurt. Where does the hurt? What caused the hurt? Is it how I thought about the situation? Was my expectation that I thought things were going to end differently? And so you could keep looking deeper and see how you might untie that knot. I want to mention too that naming emotions is one way to get calmer in the moment, but everybody's different. I remember I had somebody who was very tactile, and so it helps kind of knowing how do you get present. Some people are present visually, some people are present through the body, through feeling things. Some people are really good with words and language, so for them naming emotions would be great. I had a guy who would have rage in his car, and he would he'd make unkind gestures to other drivers. Use your imagination on that.
Well, I don't have to.
Yeah.
I'm one of those guys, as my followers and listeners knows. I've been known to do a live video where I have some road rage, but yeah, no imagination necessary. But
So
anyway,
he
go.
was so I remember I like to always ask people, what's your hobby? What do you really enjoy doing? If you had a day off, what would you like to do? Right. And so I remember I asked that to this guy I was working with, and he had said that he loved to travel. And when he would travel, he would pick up little stones that would remind him of that place. So he had a collection, and he could just hold these stones and bring them back to that place.
Yeah.
And so he was very tactile. And I worked with him on the breathing and that, but it didn't seem to improve his raging in the car. And then I remembered, oh, wait, he's tactile. So I asked him if he wouldn't mind what it would be like for him to bring one of those stones with him and put it in his pocket and just carry it with him. And when he noticed himself starting to get angry, you have to do it at an early stage. That's why it's good to get in the body. You can feel sometimes these energies or emotions at the very early level, because if you wait until it's full blown, you won't even remember. You're getting disengaged from the thinking brain. You won't even think about the strategy. It's too late. So he noticed he was getting irritated at the drivers, and he reached into his pocket and he held onto this, and it brought him back to that wonderful place where he'd experienced, and totally turned him away from that distressing person. So I think it's important to kind of think what might work for you too.
Right. Yeah.
And, again, everybody's different, but
yeah, I think it's important to have a mindset of trying things. Again, practice. Like, you're not going to do something once, and even if it does work that one time, it might not work the next time, or maybe it takes 6 times trying that same thing before it actually works, before you sort of get used to and familiar. But also, it might just, that particular way might not work. I teach a lot and talk a lot about getting into your body and massaging your body, because that really works for me. When I'm stressed, I can feel it right back here. But right on both sides of the spine, right underneath the neck. I know that when I feel that, I massage. That's telling me you're stressed out. Take a minute and massage your body. So I think listening to your body is one of the most important things. That I didn't know that 4 years ago. I would have looked at you like you had 3 heads if you would have said something like drop into your body. Like, what the hell are you talking about? But we talked a lot about sort of anger around this. But sadness, depression, is another significant feeling or feelings that occur during this process. Is the mechanisms, the tools, the practices the same for sadness versus anger, or are there some nuances, some differences that maybe should be addressed? If perhaps the people listening aren't angry, they're just sad.
Well, I think that sometimes men describe anger or depression a little differently than women might. They might get irritated, annoyed, angry.
Right.
Those could all be signs, or fatigue, loss of interest in things. These are all signs that there's actually depression. So if you're feeling that you're just kind of going through the motion on things, and you're, and that you're that it's persistent and you're not able to kind of get out of that, I would actually think about getting help. I mean, calling, go to a support center, or get speak with a psychotherapist about depression, go see somebody. And I think that is really important. Again, this kind of idea that we don't have to do it alone, that we can get help. Sometimes reading a book can help. I mean, I'm not saying that everybody has to, if you're feeling depressed, but you have to kind of be the judge. If you're not really getting out of it, if you're having thoughts of harming yourself, or it's getting extreme like that, then you need to get help. And then that's the right thing to do for yourself.
How do you feel about just out of curiosity, it just kind of hit me, how do you feel about medication, like pharmacology? Like, do you feel like it plays a role in especially sadness, depression?
I think it can play a big role. I had major depressive disorder in my 20s, and when that happened, because of a traumatic background in my family, when that happened, I was fortunate. I found a really great therapist who helped me and prescribed medications that I only took when I needed them. But they were helpful along with what I learned. And so I don't think it's a matter of either or. I think the medications can definitely help us,
Yeah.
and so can looking at the context of what's happening in my life and how can I learn the kinds of skills to help me, cope with this in a better way. Right? We don't all have perfect teachers, unfortunately, in our families growing up, do we?
Oh my gosh, no. I think that's a big problem for a lot of us, especially I
Oh
think
yeah,
my
yeah.
generation. The our parents. We were the first latchkey kids. We certainly weren't taught. I mean, any of this stuff. I don't know how much of it was sort of out there, but regulating emotions or I mean, give me a break. That was yeah. This is what I was taught. Stop crying, or you have something to cry about. Well,
Yeah.
I'm already crying. But
Sounds like
but
we had the same
I think
parental.
a lot of us that are probably I don't know mid-30s on up had probably very very similar experiences, and it's unfortunate. We could probably spend a whole podcast episode talking about the root of that and how that affects people, but I know it certainly handicapped me when I was dealing with anything of significant emotional upheaval. It was always a struggle. I had anger issues. I have depression. I had depression. Um, it, it, and I had zero tools. I
Yeah.
self-medicated. I did a lot of that.
Oh, there's so many tools out there. I mean,
Yeah.
I have a book, 101 Mindful Ways to Build Resilience, which is
Uh,
about having mental clarity, finding optimism, changing your attitude, getting resources in your life. I mean, there's a whole field of psychological hope,
yeah.
right? That
Yeah.
requires both way power and willpower. And if you're
Uh,
depressed, you're not going to have the willpower, which is the energy to
yeah.
go ahead and make changes that you need to do. The way power is problem solving. How do I get around this obstacle, right?
Uh,
But there are ways to do it. And so I would say you can regain the hope. And yeah, there's a lot of skills out there for people. Um, don't give up. uh, you know, uh, but it's always not always easy. And
no, it isn't, and it's hard to see any hope when you're in the throes of it, especially in the very, very beginning. If you don't mind, we'll touch on this briefly. You talked about, and I didn't know this. You went through a divorce. How was as a generic, broad question? How was that? Like, I mean,
well,
uh,
I'll tell you, it was a real eye opener in terms of my family pattern and family history, and it got me to look at um, the family belief system around marriage, which was you get married and you make it work no matter what,
yeah,
right? And, and I can remember I had my father was much older when I was getting divorced, and and it was a tough thing. And my father found out about it. He says, "What do you mean? You couldn't even make it 12 years? We've been married 70 years."
no, that's helpful.
Oh,
Thanks,
make
Dad.
me feel good, Dad.
Yeah.
So, but I realized that was part of my own inner unknown real expectation about how things were supposed to go, and that somehow I had failed. I really thought I had somehow just failed, when actually it gave me some real insights into my family pattern. And looking at if you have brothers and sisters, looking at siblings, what are their relationships like? But
True.
going back, I mean, it was interesting. I mean, and years ago, my parents' age and before that, really there wasn't much option, to get whether or not to get divorced, because
Uh,
you had to stay together, and people wouldn't even try to help you. Your own family wouldn't help you if you tried to leave and you
uh,
needed help. So it was a different ball game back then. But maybe that's the plus and minus now, is we have the ability to not stay in a harmful relationship, um, uh, and that's the positive side. The other side is it's painful and it's
uh,
difficult to get through it. So we need to uh, feel good at some level about trying to not stay in an abusive relationship or a harmful relationship, and to
uh,
look at what uh, what would it be like for me to be in a more loving relationship?
Man,
And to
yeah,
ask yourself, and I remember when I was going through that divorce, I had a good friend who said, well, because I found that I kind of had amnesia. When bad
man,
things would happen, I had amnesia to totally forget it. And
yeah,
then it would repeat.
yeah,
And this friend of mine said, he said, why don't you write down all those? He says, I noticed that you don't, seem to remember that this
that's
happened, 3 months ago, and you told me about this a year ago. And so
right,
I
right,
started to write them down. And it was a wonderful exercise for myself to see, wow, this is such a repetitive pattern. And why
yeah,
do I have this amnesia? And I could see the amnesia in my own
sure,
family history around
mm,
abuse.
right,
So, uh, sometimes it's a real eye opener in a lot of
yeah,
ways, but it helps us to grow.
yeah,
And
it
I
sure
think that's
does.
that's the silver lining.
Yeah, I say it all the time. It is an opportunity. It's an unwanted, unasked for, shitty
Mm,
opportunity, but it is an
yeah.
opportunity. And you have to, at least in my view, you have to take advantage of that. You have to. For me, I had to have meaning, right? In other words, it didn't just happen to me and destroy my life. It happened to me, and I was able to learn about myself, grow,
Mm,
learn new tools, skills, just be a better human, better father, hopefully someday a better partner. I had to look at it that way because that gave it meaning. Like it gave it a reason, not just my life is destroyed. It's yes, but and I can do and learn and grow and all these other things. So that was incredibly important for me for sure, 100%. So the last question. First of all, thank you for doing this. And we'll cover where to find you and your books and all that. But the last question that I ask everyone is, what words of wisdom would you impart to a man who's just beginning his divorce process?
well, one of the key things I'd say is that this too shall pass.
Right.
Right? We need to know that we are going to have a future life that is, and I love that you brought in the word meaningful. We can have a lot of meaning in our life, and this is a step on the journey. It's a process, it's a journey. Be kind to yourself as you go through this journey. Have compassion for yourself above all. Take care of yourself. Watch the things that you do that impact your physical and mental health, and and find like-minded friends and companions on your journey.
Amen. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. How can people find you and your books, and where's the best place to reach you?
Yeah, well, the best place probably is mindfulpractices.com. That's my website, MINDFUL, 1L, practices.com. And you can email me from there.
Sure.
That directly comes to me. I have a
Nice.
newsletter. You can sign up for that if you want. And you can find my books. I also have CDs on stress release and um, healing, stress release, and relaxation up there. So
Very
you might be interested in that. And
nice.
yeah, so there, you can also find Travelers is online at your local bookstores, and that is a story really about growth and healing and relationships, as well as a
Nice.
mystical journey. So,
Nice. Sounds good. Donald, thank you so much for doing this. Really appreciate it.
oh,
Take care. Yeah. Bye.
thanks, Michael.
Take
Enjoy it.
care.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Bye.
Thank you so much for watching and/or listening. Since my separation in July of 2019, I have done an incredible amount of work on myself. I've had many different therapists, life coaches, and went through different programs. I've taken all that I've learned and put it into my own program called Forged by Fire. If you are interested in having me help you navigate your divorce, please hit my website, risingphoenixdivorcecoach.com. I look forward to working with you.